Let's go ahead and get started. This is the community call number 3 for the Node Operators Association. Thanks everybody for joining today. Appreciate you setting aside some time to join us. We're going to try a new format today. This is going to use the Discord stage functionality instead of just the regular voice channels. This shouldn't impact anything other than just hopefully minimizing moderation efforts. If you'd like to speak or you have something to say, just go ahead and use the request to speak button, and I'll see your request over there and try to include you as best I can. We've got a tight schedule today. I actually need to jump off right at the hour mark, so let's go ahead and get started. The agenda for today is posted in the announcement, but I'll also go ahead and put this in the general channel just so everybody can see it. First up, let's go ahead and do a quick BizDev recap of what's gone on in the last couple weeks with the unofficial BizDev team. As a reminder, if you are interested in becoming more involved in the BizDev side of things, just let me or Nick S. know. Marceau is also joins us every once in a while for making up the unofficial BizDev team at the moment, but we're always happy to have more people join. So let us know if you're interested. So with that, I'll move straight into the update. We met with quite a few folks in the last couple weeks since the last community call. First up, Swell. We spoke with them actually at a couple of occasions. We met with them more directly to discuss potential partnership in the near term. They are finalizing their list of whitelisted partners for their permission side of the protocol on launch, and we're hoping to get connected enough that we can join that list. We'll get back to some of the efforts on that in a little bit, but I also wanted to mention that we met with Lido as well, and we had a good productive conversation with them about the potential overlap in some research that we're doing surrounding the NOAA certification program and the Lido efforts to decentralize their protocol and bring on a more permissionless side. So that was really exciting. It was great to meet a lot of the folks there. Next up, we also met with Obal, the sort of a competitor to the SSV network. Obal is a low-level tech solution essentially for distributed validator technology, and we're quite a bit away from that actually having an impact on our operations. But if you've ever done BizDev before, you'll know that it's important to invest in relationships many times a long time before they are showing any sort of fruit. So we made some great conversations happen with Obal as well, and excited to work with them in the future. Next up, Consensus was actually held in Austin this year, which is where I'm based, and so I had a great opportunity to host a little meetup downtown with the SSV network folks, and Thomas G, the largest operator for Rocket Pool, was also there, and Swell sent Bailey, their head of growth, and there was even a few folks from Wave GP, a crypto wealth management fund. Lots of great folks showed up, and we had a great time discussing the state of the staking market, how we could potentially work together, and what the future looks like. So that's our BizDev update for today. I'm trying to move kind of quickly through that so that we can have more time to speak about some of the other stuff, but I do want to take a moment to let anybody ask some questions before we move on. Any questions or comments on the BizDev stuff? All right, I see no requests, so let's move on. Next up, we'll do a quick legal update. We met with the BizDev team met with DTS this last week, and I'm going to go ahead and pass off, or well, it wasn't this last week. I guess it was the week before, but I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Nick S, who will give an update on the legal side of things. Nick, are you?
Yep, I just joined.
Excellent. All right, go ahead.
Hey guys. Yeah, so it was a good call with ETS. They are a sort of tax and DAO advisory services firm that's based in Europe, and they have a lot of experience working with various organizations that are trying to look into DAO structures. And after that meeting, as well as I do my own research, the space for DAO entity um, formation is sort of extraordinarily broad and vast, and also currently a lot is up in the air in terms of what's the right way to do things, especially for organizations that may have a heavy U.S. Uh, U.S. presence. I threw out a quick survey last week, I believe, and it looked like about 70% of our current members are U.S. based, and there's a lot of questions right now around what is the optimal way to position a DAO or any type of legal entity that's wrapping a protocol of some sort. And when you have a lot of folks within the United States, because the United States is currently one of the the least permissive regions in the world when it comes to flexibility around DAOs. You want to be very careful about putting immediately wanting to move the structure to the Cayman Islands, to uh, any other jurisdiction outside of the U.S. Just because a lot of the benefits that you may get up front can be actually turn into major negatives if they're seeing the IRS or other U.S. organizations are seeing large amounts of revenues being generated and then funneled to U.S. based members. So we have a lot of questions that we need to first ask ourselves over the coming weeks. When it, basic protocol design questions, which then have impact on downstream impacts on governance potentially, which then has further downstream implications as to what is the optimal way to structure the organization. I think in the near term, what is most important is, right now, Mike and I are the only members of the multisig. And again, thanks to everyone who donated to the quadratic staking round. I think we raised about 27,000 DAI, which is awesome. But in the near term, Mike and I have questions around, how do we, insulate ourselves legally, just in case anything were to go wrong. And more importantly, as we move forward, once we sort of go through the process of designing the protocol and how we want to approach the market, what is the amount of funding that we're going to need to raise to make this a possibility, to make this possible, to make our vision possible. And once we have a better sense of the scope and the costs involved, how do we move on from there? That's sort of the first major question. And maybe that starts off with a simple LLC wrapper that sort of exists to contract with developers and other entities that help us build this thing. And then from there, we can theoretically over time we sort of wind that down if the protocol is ossified, and then sort of transitioning into a more permissionless DAO structure. But there's a ton of open questions, and I know this isn't. I wish I had more on the phone for you, but you know, in the near term, I think we're going to keep it very light. Um, make sure that we're protected from a liability perspective. But once we get more color around the medium term strategy, then we can aggressively move forward with looking into more robust legal structures. So that's all I have for now.
Cool. Thanks so much, Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to it, that real quickly, we're Nick and I and Marceau will be in Hawaii this next coming week for HodlerCon. So while we're there, we'd like to organize a meetup, just sort of an informal chat. If anyone happens to be there, it would be great to meet up. And one of the things that Nick and I will be discussing is what we sort of envision as the future for in the near future and potentially far future for NOAA's protocol efforts, and what that looks like, because this is going to really heavily impact both the biz dev side and the legal side. And so we're really thinking very heavily about this. And if you have any thoughts on this, of course we will definitely be excited to read whatever you have to say post it in the Discord or speak up now. So on that front, is there anything that any thoughts people have on structure, on really any of the topics we've just discussed? Feel free to raise your hand or throw something into chat. All right, seeing nothing, I'm gonna go ahead and move on, but don't let that stop you. If you think of something as we move on, it's we can jump back. It's fine. Um, so next up, as Nick mentioned, the quadratic funding round has ended, and that's super exciting. We like everyone has already seen at this point. We received 27,300 and something die from the funding round, and that's a fantastic amount. Honestly, we're in the higher side of the projects that were on the funding round, and that's just honestly it's incredible. Thanks to everybody who donated, and we will of course. This is just as a reminder. This is community money. This isn't going towards paying anybody in particular right now. So on that front, one of the things that we'd like to start a conversation on right now is what people think that money should be used for. One of the things that we've been tossing around in the biz dev side of stuff is the legal fees, which are probably impending if we decide to go down a route of a more specific structure. That I've been through this process with other DAOs before, and it can cost quite a bit. But I'd really like to know what everybody else thinks on this subject. I'm not seeing anybody requesting to speak, so I'll just keep going. But if you have any thoughts on this, definitely let us know. These are, this is community money. This isn't, earmarked for anything in particular. So, there's a lot of tasks that need doing. We could put bounties up. We could do all sorts of stuff. So, um, so yeah, that's the funding stuff. Seeing no requests to speak or anything in the chat, I'm gonna go ahead and move on. So moving back to Swell again, I'd like to bring Brass Lion up here since they're working on an update. Brass Lion, can I promote you here to? Yeah, there we go. Okay, I think you should be able to speak now.
We go. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Cool, great. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Nice to meet you all. I've met some of you around the ecosystem, but for those who haven't met me, hello. I'm Bryce Lyon. I volunteered to talk with Swell. Wanted to put me in touch with them last week, specifically their CTO and some of their growth team. And we've all together been having a high-level discussion of what Swell working towards and what kind of feasible high-level workflows and integrations we can do with them. So Swell is pretty early, or they're very early in their kind of development process. They last said they were trying to get to the Goerli testnet this week. I don't know if they actually have got out there or not. But so there's limited public code that we can read through. So it's basically I've been having a kind of high level discussion about what they're looking for and what they're working towards and how we can integrate. And going off their docs, they are kind of working towards a kind of 3-layer model. So they want to go with permissionless operators that will work pretty similarly to Rocket Pool for everyone who's familiar with them, in that permissionless nodes will register with them, and then they'll put up 16 ETH of collateral, and then the other 16 ETH is contributed by stakers, Swell stakers. But then, unlike Rocket Pool, there'll also be a KYC operator, or as Wanda said before, a permissioned set. And they will only have to put up 1 ETH of collateral, with the rest being contributed by stakers. And then also, I believe there is a third layer where the KYC operators won't have to put up any collateral, but instead they will have to be bound by legal agreements to kind of cover Swell's liability in case of loss of funds, right? So that's quite different to the kind of discussions I saw on the kind of tech standards and the high level discussions of what we were talking about, which is staking with Rocket Pool, the P&O funds with Rocket Pool. But I put forward a kind of workflow where a very high level plan for them, where Swell would contribute ETH to the NOA P&O multi-sig, and then that ETH would then be distributed to kind of known operators or maybe permissionless operators in the NOA ecosystem, and they could stake that through Rocket Pool if there isn't a queue, or if there is, then they could solo validate, and maybe when withdrawals come around, they could withdraw that when the Rocket Pool queue disappears, and then get extra yield on it that way. Basically, that quite a different workflow to what they have outlined in their docs. And I was expecting pushback on that, but they seem pretty open. They seem pretty open to that. It was described as broadly workable by their CTO. So last where I've left off is where we've left it off is the CTO is going to talk to their engineers and kind of get feedback on that plan. Yeah. So any questions on that? I'm happy to answer it now or later. I wrote up a kind of summary, Wanda, which I haven't told you about. I don't know if you want me to post that anywhere.
Sure, that actually that'd be great. And I'll ask you a question, which I already know the answer to, but I think is worth
Yes.
going out for anyway, just on the call. Right now, the Rocket Pool protocol has a fairly sizable queue for new mini pools. So what do we do in the case where Swell gives us money to be staked? So they essentially push ETH to our multisig, but we can't stake it because Rocket Pool is, has a queue.
Yeah, good question. So I think the current idea is to allow operators within the NOA ecosystem to solo stake that collateral, to start generating an income on the funds. And then I guess once withdrawals are implemented, then as the queue clears, then maybe we can start shifting those funds over to Rocket Pool as and when the queue is less is less long, or maybe we just keep it solo validating to kind of spread the risk around different protocols. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. Yeah.
Good.
And to be clear to everybody, the queue is not that long at the moment. It's only a couple weeks long, basically, or at least the validators that are starting up now are I think 15 days old. So it's not horrific, and I would imagine, we haven't spoken with Swell about this in detail, but my guess is that they would be comfortable with that kind of a delay. But this is really going to sort of be a long-term partnership between us and Swell, and sort of figuring out what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with, and what we're comfortable with and what we're not comfortable with. So this process is just beginning, and if you're interested in helping out, then please let one of us know. But we'll be happy to get you connected into that. So any questions, any comments on this stuff before we move on?
Just a general comment, that is helpful to know that they'd be willing to do that. That could potentially accelerate, discussions around legal and stuff like that, just because of the fact that we may be, interested with funds, moving funds around, and because we'd be doing it, in a manual fashion rather than through a, fully automated smart contract type thing. that could introduce liabilities that we need to be cognizant of. So
Absolutely.
good to know.
Yeah, my guess is that, everyone's priority is getting as much ETH into NOAA member nodes as possible, as quickly as possible, over some sort of automated smart contract solution, which may take a while. We haven't had broad conversations about this kind of thing directly, but my personal preference is to get something rolling and just kind of push that a little bit further, if necessary, through manual means, and then over time transition into an automated solution as we develop the capability for this, either through development or just a long enough time period where somebody eventually makes some scripts and we get there. With 27,000 DAI, it's not going to be enough to develop smart contracts that are audited, that are safe, and all these kinds of things in the near term. So what we'll need to do is raise more funding if we want to go down that route. But before that happens, I think, at least in my opinion, it makes a lot of sense to go ahead and get started, learning what we can from these integrations and getting the NOAA name out there, getting our branding to a level where people are starting to trust us, and we can make future connections with other protocols more easily, things like that. So unless there's any, I guess, contradictions to that, or people have objections here, then that's the route that I think that makes the most sense, at least for the near term here. So let's seeing no comments or anything, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Next up, thanks so much, Brass Lion, for your contributions here. Really appreciate it, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
So next up, we've got the NOAA network monitoring concept, which Owlot and Real Steel have graciously volunteered to take a look at. This is part of the broader certification idea that we're sort of working on as a whole. Do either of the two of you, Owlot or Real Steel, have any comments on this process you want to talk about at all? I just wanted to set aside some time for you. Yeah. Well, feel free. I'll bring you in.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking a little bit more about this together also with Ben V. He's my husband. He's sitting next to me. So, but if you want to do some rating on the validators, I saw someone already saying maybe we can integrate like a firewall check or something like that. I think that's going to be hard because we don't know the IP addresses of people unless they give them to us, right? And I can imagine that not all the node operators are willing to just say, hey, this is where I run my node. So it does require a little bit more of thought about what exactly do we want to know, how do we know that we are actually rating the right validator and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, great point. I think this will sort of go hand in hand with the certification program that we're sort of looking into. I totally agree that it's going to be very difficult to get people who are on the permissionless side of things and don't really want to engage on any of the KYC stuff, interviews or deeper conversations. That's going to be tough for us to audit those kinds of people. But so I think that a necessary evil there is going to be the full collateralization of those kinds of nodes, basically requiring people to build a reputation using their money as a backstop. So if something goes wrong, they'll be fully responsible. But on the more trusted side of things, if we do have a closer relationship with node operators, then we can, ensure that we do have that kind of information. And of course, we can keep it private and make sure that that's not, publicly exposed information. But that's a great point about IP addresses and things like that. We will need to have some sort of, clear connection with this node operator works on this validator, which is hosted at this particular IP, for example. So a great point there. Anything else on the topic of network monitoring? This is a very early stage kind of discussion, but I think something that's going to be crucial for the long run success.
Yeah, from me, it's of course there's a lot of options to do network monitoring, so it's not going to be a hard thing. It's just mainly what do we want to monitor and what is the reason we want to do this. That's if we have that clear, then it's easy to set something up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and actually, just to expound on that a little bit, Rated.network has some APIs. Beacon Chain also has some APIs. I think there's a pretty clear path towards doing this at an early stage. What we would probably do is some sort of centralized monitoring service that basically just runs on a single server somewhere. And we'll start there. In the long run, we could develop a more decentralized service that maybe we have some sort of custom CLI stuff that we run, that every node of the NOA network needs to run in order to be a part of it. This is much more long-term stuff, but I think that it's important to think about how we can take these potentially centralized links here and kind of push them outwards and decentralize them further as time goes on. This may be years away, but hopefully, in the short term, we'll get sort of a proof of concept running, something very, very centralized and straightforward, and then over time, move to a little bit more of a decentralized model there. Anything else to say on network monitoring or certification? We're still kind of working through the certification side of things, but I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. See, Ben V is typing something. All right. Let's see. Are we going to ask node operators to run custom software for monitoring purposes? Great question. And, that's really kind of up for debate. I think at the very beginning, my guess is that we're not really going to have a strict need for that kind of thing. But perhaps down the line, I think personally, it's sort of important to reduce the barriers as much as possible to joining the ecosystem. And then, down the line, once we have sort of a really healthy ecosystem with a lot of participants, then maybe we can add additional requirements in. But I would say that one of the goals that I have for this community personally is that we can remain as inclusive as possible. I want anyone who wants to join to be able to have a clear path to doing so. And so if we can, start with as few barriers as possible, that would be ideal. But, we have to remain safe too. We want to be able to protect our reputation as well as the ETH that's being generously trusted in our hands. So we kind of have to strike a balance between the two of those. Any other questions, comments on network monitoring or the certification process as a whole? All right. Well, let's move on then. Next up, the governance stuff. So we sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but one of the things that kind of goes into the legal and structuring side of things is how we decide to organize ourselves from an internal perspective. If we look at a sort of meta perspective of NOA as it is right now, we have sort of just kind of naturally gravitated towards a few folks working on slightly different areas. People aren't really overlapping that much, which is good for efficiency. While at the same time, we don't have a ton of process overhead. We're a very small group. This is kind of a natural thing. This is generally how a lot of the communities at our stage operate. So what I'd like to sort of just discuss momentarily today is the idea of kind of agreeing on this process as adequate right now. I don't think it really makes a whole lot of sense for us to dive in and create this whole bureaucracy, if we only have a few dozen participants who are really interacting with stuff at a you know, high enough level to need organization. So I wrote up a few thoughts. I linked them along with the agenda, and it's pretty minimal, but basically from a lot of the research I've done on decentralization and similar projects to ours, I think there's a lot of benefits to remaining kind of loosely organized and not really worrying too much about who's in charge and who's not in charge, things like that. So my proposal is pretty straightforward. Essentially, I think we should kind of think about things through the idea of a working group. This is pretty common for more decentralized, digital focused groups like ours, and it seems to work pretty well. If you're familiar with the Internet Engineering Task Force, they're a group of really a huge group of engineers, managers, all sorts of people who are just basically interested in working on internet standards. And this group has their roots, their ancient roots in the internet times. These days it's a much larger community, but similar to the Linux kernel development and other decentralized projects, there's a focus on equality and a flat hierarchy. Basically, we go with the idea that working groups are important. Anyone who is on sort of a committee style thing to get a particular goal accomplished, doesn't necessarily have any sort of authority over any other person who's working on the same goal. If there's a disagreement on how to accomplish that, then there are really two ways to resolve that disagreement. The first way would be through the classic discussion and hash it out. Basically, everybody comes to a rational conclusion and compromises if necessary on the way to go forward. Essentially, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone. Rough consensus is an interesting concept because it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to agree, but just everybody sort of agrees to move forward, even though they may not. Any dissenters may think that this isn't the best choice, but it's better to actually get something happening than to have nothing happen and just argue. So that's one way of resolving things. Another way, which I think is worth pointing out in this space, it's less of a thing for the IETF or the Linux kernel, but it is sort of a more common thing for the crypto space, which is if you disagree with an approach, then just go do the approach that you think is better. There's nothing stopping you. So if, for example, somebody says, we shouldn't take Swell ETH and redirect it into Rocket Pool. Instead, I think it's important that, for whatever reason that we only do solo nodes. Well, that's, totally fine. And if you build a solution for that as well, then it's not like that conflicts with the other strategy. Both can coexist, and through sort of the marketplace of participation, we can use both. So I wanted to bring up this kind of not necessarily as a long discussion, but just something that I think it's a discussion worth having. Essentially, how we should organize ourselves in the short term, just so we can all sort of get rough consensus and agree on how to move forward without worrying too much about creating structures or electing representatives, or I've seen a lot of other projects that really early on sort of bury themselves under bureaucracy and create all sorts of structures that are unnecessary, just under the assumption that they need to be organized and that'll make them more efficient. But at least my proposal is that we try to remain as lightweight as possible and just get things done and prioritize that over, any kind of bureaucracy or organization. So, any thoughts, questions, ideas on this front? Does anybody have anything to say here?
Just that I think that makes sense, and as we move forward and things start to materialize from a protocol design perspective, or discussions with Swell move forward and they start wanting to actually think about distributing ETH to us, maybe that will be the time to start codifying things a bit more or structuring things in more detail. And there's the fact that we have validators as the core thing we're dealing with here sort of also gives us an interesting way to think about incentivization of participation, whether that's participating in the design process or voting on things in the future. Hopefully something we can discuss in Hawaii is can we use validators, basically the claim on the cash flow generated by validators as a way to incentivize participation in the group overall, maybe as a way to buttress or even potentially replace more financialized token models and stuff. I've just been thinking about it, and it seems like an interesting thing to think about and pursue.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is also something that's been on my mind a lot lately. One of the things that the Rocket Pool community has discussed a lot is, the utility of the RPL token versus just an ETH-based solution. This is actually, for context, this is the core difference between SSV Network and OBAL. SSV Network has a token, and they're essentially integrating that very deeply into their technology stack, whereas OBAL is going for a much more quote-unquote pure approach, where they only use ETH and they essentially take a small fee in ETH instead of trying to kind of utilize a token model. So one of the things that has come up a time and time again for the BizDev team in our discussions with other teams is the concept of reputation and what NOA is really doing, and what value we're really providing to the space. Everyone else seems to really hone in on that. They see NOAA's contribution as a reputation sort of solution, and the idea that being NOAA certified is, like a trophy essentially, and kind of that squares really well with some of the thoughts that we've had on how to incentivize participation. We could, just like every other protocol, the last 5 years or whatever, we could make our own token. We could integrate it really deeply with our operations. Maybe we, for example, pay people out in a particular token or something like that. Or we make people stake it in order to be a NOAA operator or something like that. These are interesting ideas, but I think that, one of the unique sort of things that we can do as one of the newest projects in the Ethereum ecosystem is I think that we can sort of take advantage of the developments that have occurred in the last few years. NFTs are a huge deal now, not necessarily just for pictures or what have you, but there's plenty of other use cases for them as well. And then there's also the relatively new concept of soul-bound tokens. That really squares with the idea of reputation as well. So, I would love to have a conversation about this kind of stuff, more broadly. Like, what does incentivization look like? What does participation look like? How do we codify that and do it in a fair way that's not really extractive or tokens are really great if you have investors, if you have people who are coming in and saying we want a return on investment, and this token is going to provide that return on investment. But those kinds of entities can also be sort of a particular type of force on a community too. If you have an incubator or a VC or something like that, then that changes the tone of the conversations that we have as a community. Do we want that kind of influence on the way that we view our operations? Do we want to focus on generating a return on investment, or do we want to focus on creating as much value for our members as possible? And those don't necessarily have to be at odds with one another, but sometimes they are. If we have investors, especially more broadly in the larger community, if we had an open token, for example, this would cause people to, it might cause more engagement. Maybe we would see a lot more people come in and be interested in the NOAA concept. Tokenization has a lot of benefits, but at the same time, maybe it also calls for, people coming in and saying, do this short-term thing to pump the value of the token, so that I can get a better return on my investment. And these are, again, sometimes these are good forces and sometimes these are bad forces. So one of the things that, I've been thinking about very heavily, like Nick mentioned, is the idea that we can maybe come up with some sort of alternative incentivization for people. Like, the longer you participate in NOAA and maybe the higher rank you get with your soul-bound reputation token, then that entitles you to slightly better rates of return. Or maybe you are trusted with maybe we just use the certification program to incentivize people. You get the capability to run more validators if you are trusted, things like that. So, that really rewards contributors and people who are, really crucial to the ecosystem and to our development. I'm sure that, everyone who's contributing to NOAA right now in a material way wants to be rewarded. And that's something that, we really need to think about. But, doing that in a smart way and not doing it in a sort of extractive way is going to be really crucial. So if you have any thoughts on this, feel free to speak up, not just now, but just in general. Give us some thought over the next few weeks or whatnot, and, post your thoughts.
Yeah, and I encourage everyone to think about the fact that if the vision's successful and we end up building something that is being heavily used, we're going to be plugged into numerous different protocols. We could have 1,000+ operators, and we would represent a attack surface just like other existing protocols out there on the actual underlying beacon chain health, right? So I'm just trying to be open-minded about different approaches that can help us minimize the governance attack vector, if you will. So
that's another great point. Yeah, we this is a discussion that Lido is having very deeply right now because of their position. And I know that they take it very seriously, but at the same time, that they're not really incentivized to stop accepting ETH. And so, that may be a position that if we ended up being very, very successful, we might be in that position too. So it's good to be thinking about these kinds of things in advance, and ideally creating a structure which does minimize the risk to the overall ecosystem if we were to become a big player. And I do want to point out that regardless of whether we eventually create a liquid staking token or whatnot, we will be a part of the Ethereum staking ecosystem on the validator side of things. So even if we don't have any kind of similarities right now to the tokens that the concerns that people are raising about the existing protocols, if we had even if we had 1,000 validators, if we represented 70% of the network or something like that, while we would be decentralized and we wouldn't be able to necessarily force operators to do a particular thing, there's still sort of a governance cost there. There's also a political cost there. Nasho, I see you're on the call today. He and I had a great discussion about the idea of limiting protocols the other day, and I thought it was a really productive conversation. And it sort of helped me contextualize the ideas surrounding the politics in this space, as well as like long-term investment into a reputation versus just a short-term let's make money kind of mindset. And that's not necessarily something that everyone is thinking about all the time. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And these are the kinds of questions that are coming up. And my perspective isn't necessarily going to be everyone's perspective. So I really encourage everyone here, as well as anyone who's listening to this call later, please post your thoughts. We want this to be an inclusive community where we design something that makes sense for everybody, and not just the people in the community, but something that's going to be a huge public good positive for the entire Ethereum community. So yeah, with that, I'll ask one more time. Does anybody have any thoughts on this before we move on? Okay. All right. Well, last up here, I wanted to open up the floor for just kind of a broad community Q&A, open discussion on whatever topics we like. I've got about 10 minutes here before I need to get going for my next appointment, but I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor. If you have something to say, then just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll bring you up here. All right. If we get nothing, then we could just end the call early. Nothing wrong with that. Get a little time back. All right. Seeing as no one is requesting to speak, I'm going to go ahead and end it. Then, if you have anything, after the call that you'd like to bring up, then, as always, please post it. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining. Appreciate your time today, and appreciate your support for NOAA. We will be back here with a new community call post Hawaii with some updates there, and hopefully we'll have some more interesting information on Swell and integrations there, certification process, all sorts of ongoing initiatives. So thanks, everybody, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Until next time.
Thank you.